Well, that was a fun text. Should have assigned that one to Pastor Ted. So we'll play with that one a little bit. At some point in life, I suspect many of you have played chess, checkers, Othello, Blocus, or some other strategic board game. And the goal, of course, in those games is to defeat your opponent. But unlike boxing, where you might knock out your opponent in a single punch, the games I mentioned call for a person to make multiple moves, usually trying to consider what their opponent is going to do next or the move after that. Having the ability to think ahead is key because it enables you to make a series of good moves. Moves that put your opponent at a disadvantage and starts to limit their options, limits their ability to move. So when I play Drew, for example, in this game called Blockus, I always think I'm doing well, and it's infuriating because I cannot beat him. He just has, out of the blue, he knows how to block me every single time. The key in games is to make the best moves continually, and you will often prevail. It's often true in life, though, when you make the best moves, you often prevail. Although, unfortunately, sometimes the deck in this world is stacked against people, or it's stacked in your favor. In 2013, the global wealth pyramid was put out. And I'm sure you can find all different types of studies, but they're very similar. The findings were simple. The top of the pyramid showed the top 1% of people in the world control 50% of the wealth of the world. 50. The top 10%, which truthfully includes probably everyone in this room and everyone in Montgomery County, we control 85% of the world wealth. The top 30% have 97%. So which, if you do the math, says the bottom 70% of the world has what? 3%. You know, inequality, to say the least. So many people in this world have the back against them, their back against the wall the second they take a breath on this planet. If this was a game, and indeed it's not, the people who have all the moves at their disposal or a lot of options are people like us at the top. The people who are at an extreme disadvantage are those 70% and below. Same was true in Jesus' day. To understand Jesus' day, the top 10% were included people we would call elites, the aristocrats, the priests, the wealthy landowners. They controlled, scholars say, controlled 2/3 of all the resources. They had the control, the advantage. They were the people who made the rules. But understand, there was absolutely no middle class. There was no middle class. It was just a radical drop, and there was 90% of the culture were these peasants or untouchables, and they had approximately 1/3. They had little power or control. They were pushed around by those in power. But to understand who Jesus was and who his followers were, my understanding has changed from the time I was a kid. I used to think of Jesus as being royalty. Yeah, not really in the culture. Jesus and almost his followers were from the poor, lower peasant class. And so the story Jesus tells today is interesting, especially when you consider how his listeners, the people that were around him, might have actually heard it. Let me remind you of a simple Old Testament rule that after Israel was freed from being slaves in Egypt, as they're wandering around in the wilderness, God was teaching them, instructing them how they should live when they get into the promised land. And there's a rule that's given to Moses that he is to share. It appears in Deuteronomy. And they're told, you shall not charge interest on loans to another Israelite. Interest on money, interest on provisions, interest on anything that is lent. And it goes on to say, if you don't do that sort of thing, God indeed will bless you and all your underlings. But ultimately what we have to see is that it was a vision for building a strong, caring community. But apparently not everyone got the memo. Not everyone got the memo, or maybe they did and they just did what we do with memos, is we tear it up or ignore it. by the time of Jesus, there was these extreme wealthy landowners who would allow tenant farmers to come in. They'd have to pay a price, and certainly they had to agree to give the landowner some of the proceeds, and they would have to borrow to be able to have the enough resources to plant crops and things like that. But remember, the landowner's not supposed to charge any interest. So if you said, Alex, you can farm on my land for $100, but 6% interest, which would be $6. That 6% or $6 would be considered illegal. It was called injustice. A violation of the law is what injustice means. So what they would do is very simple. They would just write the bill for 106. 106. Just pad it in there, give Alex $100, and you have to pay me 106 back. But technically, there's no interest. It's not illegal, right? Sounds kind of fishy, doesn't it? Sounds like skirting around the thing, and it was frowned upon. So ultimately, these landowners really didn't get involved in the day-to-day affairs. They would put someone else in charge of acting on their behalf, because they could get a lot, but they could kind of keep their hands clean. So they would put the steward or a manager in charge, and if they charge interest, and they padded the books, if you will, they would be referred to by the peasants as a steward of injustice. Steward of injustice. You following me? This was a fun text to play with. But the manager or the steward, his move was to pad the books, if you will, and to put in extra for himself at the expense of others. And they were often known to charge a lot. 100% interest, 25% interest in other cases. But who were the ones getting stomped on? Were the poor people. And a lot of them just were in this cycle of debt that they simply could not get out of. This story is told in the imperfect tense in Greek, which, don't worry about that. What that means is Jesus would have told this story not just once. He would have told it over and over and over again. So they would have heard it a lot, probably because they didn't get it the first time or the second time or the third time. But apparently the steward makes some really boneheaded moves. We're not really sure what actually they were, but understand it uses the word squandered. It's the same exact word as the prodigal son, the younger brother who squandered the property. The image is of him almost throwing the resources up in the air and having the wind blow it away to nowhere. The verdict is he made some dumb moves, regardless of whether we understand him or not. He did not make the right moves, and he was ultimately going to be removed. And he had to hand over the books, hand over the ledger, and then we're privileged, if you will, to hear his inner thinking. And he says to himself, I don't want to beg. I do not also want to do hard labor. And the light bulb goes off in his head. I have a strategic move that I can play. And so what he does is he says, I'm going to change the books. And in the process of changing the books, perhaps I can make a few friends along the way. And so that's his play. So 2 examples of what he did. He goes to the first peasant farmer, asks him, how much do you owe? He says, 100 jugs of olive oil. And he says, not erase it, X it out, and write what? 50. To the next one, how much do you owe? 100 containers of wheat. Cross it off, make it 80. And what does the master do when he hears about this? He wants to give him a standing ovation. He praises this steward of injustice and says, good job, and you and I and all of us are left confused. Like, I don't get this. And it sounds like he's applauding injustice, and I don't think that can be the case. It sounds a bit strange to applaud someone if they've only collected a fraction of what is due. It sounds strange to applaud someone for being inept and causing a huge loss. But let me ask you, did the master really lose anything? Many scholars, and I kind of agree with the scholars, they believe that the manager or the steward simply removed all of the interest that he was gathering for himself, that he tacked on and padded into the bill. In this bold move, he still could have demanded it for himself, but in this bold move, he does not. In that scenario, the master gets exactly what was due him. But the peasants, think about the peasants, they are blessed because all of a sudden this incredible weight, this incredible, if you will, injustice has been lifted from them. They have an opportunity to get out of debt and to better themselves, is what the story says. And how would the peasants feel about the steward? This is the greatest guy on the planet in their mind all of a sudden. Do you think they would possibly befriend him in the days to come? I think the answer is yes. And how about the master? If he came and showed up at the farm all of a sudden, rode in on a horse, and the peasants surrounded him, I think they would cheer him. I think they would think that he was behind this whole thing in the first place. I think they would treat him as a person who had done something incredible, and they were so grateful for it. There's such irony in this story. For me, the grand irony is a sense of community is created by one person learning it's not all about himself and gaining the most profit he can for himself. A greater sense of community is created when one person learns that life isn't all about the accumulation of possessions and money. Community is created when one sees that his actions can bring relief and help to others and strengthen them, and that brings great healing to the world. You know, a number of you probably watched the movie Beautiful Mind several years ago. It's the story of John Nash, who developed schizophrenia and went on a long journey to, in a sense, to be able to function in this world. But very simply, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for what's called the Nash equilibrium, which has impacted game theory and economics and international diplomacy. And very simply, that Nash equilibrium says that our best move is not the one that solely benefits us. It's not every person for themselves. The best move is the one that benefits us and the other. And I think ultimately that's what generosity is all about. It is a bold move, and ultimately what you have to understand is generosity brings justice into this world. That end of the story, the manager can't really be called a steward of injustice anymore, because that's not what he is anymore. He had discovered some other way of living that hopefully, even though he is fired from that role, hopefully in the next phase of his journey, he got it together and sort of carried on what we see in the story today. Generosity is a move that will always bless our heart and our soul. It will connect us to God, and it will bring hope and healing to the world around us. Amen.